In the quiet, affluent neighborhood of Georgetown, Washington, D.C., stands a house draped in history. A stately red brick mansion with white-framed windows and ivy creeping along its edges. It had once been the sanctuary of Jackie Kennedy after the tragic assassination of her husband, President John F. Kennedy. She had sought solace within its walls, grieving in the dim glow of antique lamps, her presence lingering in its polished mahogany hallways long after she moved away. The house had been sold and resold, each owner leaving behind whispers of unease. Then, in the fall of 2023, a new couple moved in, Elliot and Vivian Caldwell, a pair of historians captivated by the house's past. They had restored it to its former glory, honoring its Kennedy legacy with period-accurate furniture, shelves brimming with leather-bound books, and paintings of dignified elegance. But soon after settling in, the house revealed its secrets. It began with the mirrors. Every so often, Vivian would catch glimpses of someone standing behind her reflection. A flicker of movement, a shadow where there should be none. At first, she dismissed it as a trick of the light. But then, the scent of roses would follow. Jackie's favorite perfume, unmistakable and lingering. Elliot, ever the skeptic, brushed off his wife's unease. That was until he awoke one night to the sound of soft weeping. The house was silent, save for the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock downstairs. Yet, from the corner of their bedroom came the delicate sound of a woman crying. The room was empty. The occurrences grew stranger. Their dog, a Labrador named Chester, would stand at the bottom of the grand staircase, growling low in his throat, his fur bristling. Cold drafts whispered through rooms with no open windows. The chandelier in the dining room would sway gently, as if disturbed by an unseen presence. Then came the piano. One evening, as the Caldwells hosted a small dinner party, a haunting melody drifted from the parlor. The guests fell silent, turning towards the source of the sound. The antique grand piano, once owned by a Kennedy family friend, played a soft, melancholic tune, yet no one sat at the keys. Elliot rushed to the piano, feeling the weight of someone press against him as he reached for the lid. The music stopped abruptly. The air was thick with the scent of roses. It was Vivian who finally saw her. Late one night, restless and unable to sleep, she wandered downstairs for a cup of tea. As she passed the parlor, she saw her. A woman in an ivory-colored dress, her dark hair swept elegantly to the side, standing near the fireplace. Jackie. Vivian froze, her breath caught in her throat. The figure's face was serene yet sorrowful, her delicate hands resting lightly on the mantel. Then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone, a shimmer in the air, a soft whisper of silk dissipating into nothingness. Vivian never spoke of it to Elliot, but she knew, deep down, that the house had not forgotten its most famous resident. Months passed. The occurrences lessened, the house settling into a quiet melancholy. But one final encounter would confirm everything. On a rainy March afternoon, as Vivian dusted the old Kennedy-era books in the study, she found a single white rose placed upon Jackie's favorite chair. Neither she nor Elliot had put it there. Vivian simply smiled, placing a gentle hand over the rose. Some spirits never leave. Not out of malice, not out of unrest, but because love and loss linger longer than life itself. The house had grown quieter, but it was the kind of quiet that felt expectant, like the hush before a storm. Vivian no longer spoke of the woman she had seen, nor did she mention the rose, though its scent still clung faintly to the fabric of the chair where she had found it. Something told her that if she acknowledged it too openly, the delicate balance of their existence here might tip, and whatever tethered Jackie's spirit to the house would unravel into something neither she nor Elliot could control. Yet the house remained watchful. It was in the way the shadows stretched unnaturally long across the Persian rugs at dusk, pooling in corners like spilled ink. It was in the way the air would shift ever so slightly, as though someone had just walked past, leaving behind a breath of perfume and memory. And it was in the feeling, the feeling that they were never truly alone. One evening, as a cold drizzle painted the windows in streaks of silver, Vivian found herself drawn to the study once more. The fire had burned low in the hearth, embers glowing like dying stars beneath the ornate brass grate. She had been organizing the antique secretary desk, a relic from the Kennedy era, when her fingers brushed against something wedged deep in one of the drawers, a hidden compartment, perhaps. With careful precision, she pried it open, her pulse quickening. Inside, a small stack of yellowed envelopes lay bound by a faded ribbon, their edges curled with age. The ink had smudged slightly, but the handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, looping, every stroke deliberate. Jackie's. Vivian exhaled slowly, her hands trembling as she untied the ribbon. She had expected to find personal correspondence, perhaps letters to friends or notes of gratitude. But as she unfolded the first sheet of parchment, her breath caught in her throat. "He comes at night." The words were simple, stark against the paper, yet they carried a weight that settled deep in Vivian's bones. She turned the page, scanning the elegant script with growing unease. "I hear him whispering. I see him in the mirror. Always behind me, just out of reach." A shiver traced its way down her spine. Who was she writing about? Vivian had never liked the mirror on the second-floor landing. It was an antique, its gilded frame tarnished with time, its surface slightly warped as if the glass itself resisted reflecting the world as it was. Elliot had insisted on keeping it. Enamored by its history, it had belonged to the house since long before Jackie's time. Now, as she ascended the staircase with the letter still clutched in her hand, she found herself unable to look away from it. The hallway was dim, the sconces casting flickering pools of golden light, but the mirror remained oddly shadowed. The air was thick, oppressive, as if the walls had drawn a slow breath and were holding it, waiting. Vivian took a step closer, and then, a movement, not her own reflection but something behind it. A figure, dark and indistinct, just at the edge of sight. Her breath hitched. She spun around, expecting what? A trick of the light? Elliot standing there, watching her with concern? But the hallway was empty, the only sound the faint creaking of the floorboards beneath her feet. Slowly, she turned back to the mirror. The figure was gone, but the surface of the glass remained fogged, as though someone had stood there, breathing against it. And in that mist, faint but unmistakable, were the marks of fingers dragging down the glass. Vivian staggered back, a sharp cry caught in her throat. The letter slipped from her grasp, fluttering to the floor. Somewhere in the house, a door creaked open on its own, and the scent of roses filled the air. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Vivian stood frozen at the foot of the mirror, the weight of silence pressing against her ribs like a held breath. The faint streaks on the glass, those long, deliberate drag marks, seemed almost to glisten in the dim hallway light, as though whatever hand had made them had only just withdrawn. The scent of roses thickened, rich and suffocating, curling in the air like invisible fingers. It wasn't the delicate, fading fragrance she had come to associate with Jackie's ghost, the soft trace of a presence reluctant to leave. No, this was cloying, overwhelming, an unnatural bloom in the cold air. Then came the whisper, low, almost imperceptible, a thread of sound woven into the stillness. Vivian stiffened, her ears straining. It was not a voice she recognized. A chill feathered down her spine, an ancient instinct clawing its way up from the pit of her stomach. The whispering didn't come from the mirror, not from behind it, as she might have expected, but from all around her, seeping from the very bones of the house. It was unintelligible at first, a murmur like wind through dry leaves. But then, as if the unseen lips had pressed closer to her ear, the words unraveled into something distinct. Not hers, a single breath of sound. Not hers. Vivian recoiled, her pulse slamming against her throat. The hallway seemed darker now, the flickering sconces barely reaching the corners where shadows pooled, thick and undisturbed. Not whose? Jackie's? A sharp clatter from downstairs sent her heart skidding against her ribs. Elliot. She turned and rushed down the stairs, the polished wood cold beneath her bare feet. The study door stood half open, the fire guttering low, sending flickering shapes dancing across the bookshelves. Elliot, she called, her voice tighter than she'd intended. No response. A single book lay on the floor near the fireplace, its pages splayed open like the wings of a broken bird. Vivian crossed the room, her breath shallow, and bent to pick it up. The title sent a fresh ripple of unease through her. The Kennedy Curse. It was an old edition, one neither she nor Elliot had placed in the study. She ran her fingers over the spine, feeling the deep grooves where it had been handled, thumbed through, studied. Had Jackie read this? And then, another sound. Not from the study, not even from the hall. From above. The bedroom. Vivian's skin tightened, as though an unseen current had passed over her. Slowly, she set the book down and turned toward the staircase. At the top of the landing, just beyond the mirror, the bedroom door stood ajar. And from within, the soft, rhythmic creak of floorboards. Not the hesitant shuffle of someone shifting their weight. A step, then another, measured, unhurried. Someone or something was walking in their room. Vivian swallowed hard, her fingers digging into the banister. She wanted to call for Elliot, but the fear had lodged itself too deep, paralyzing her voice. The door creaked wider. The dim light from the hall barely reached inside, but she could see the edge of the bed, the ornate footboard silhouetted against the darkness. And then, a shadow moved, not the kind cast by flickering candlelight, not the trick of an old house settling. Presence. It lingered just inside the doorway, a formless figure darker than the shadows themselves. No features, no movement beyond the slow shift of something unseen watching. Vivian felt the sharp, electric sting of panic seize her chest. And then, the voice again. Not hers. A whisper so close it might have been inside her own mind. Vivian stumbled backward, her hand gripping the railing as though it might anchor her to reality. Something was wrong. This presence, it wasn't Jackie. And whatever it was, it had been waiting. The darkness at the bedroom door did not move, yet Vivian felt it watching, measuring. It was an awareness unlike anything she had ever known, deep, cold, sentient. The air between them thickened, pressing against her skin as though unseen hands were trying to push her back, force her away. But she could not look away. Her pulse roared in her ears, drowning out the crackling of the dying fire downstairs. The scent of roses had vanished. In its place, a damp, earthen smell curled through the air like rotting wood, like old stone, like something buried deep and forgotten. Then, slowly, the shadow began to recede. Not fading, not dispersing, but retreating, as though slipping deeper into the house. The door to the bedroom, which had been slightly ajar, groaned shut with an agonizing slowness. The sound echoed down the stairwell. Vivian stood paralyzed, gripping the railing until her knuckles burned white. Every nerve in her body screamed for her to run, to wake Elliot, to leave the house altogether. But something stronger, something deeper held her in place. Not hers. The voice had said it twice now. Not Jackie's. Then whose? A breath of cold air touched the nape of her neck, light as a whisper. She spun, expecting to see Elliot behind her, perhaps groggy, confused by her pacing in the night. But there was no one. Only the long hallway stretching toward the darkened study, the mirrors catching slivers of candlelight like watching eyes. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed 3 times. The walls seemed to tighten around her. The house shifting in ways she could not see but could feel, timbers groaning, old glass settling into its frame, the whisper of something moving just out of sight. And then, a knock, soft, deliberate, from behind the bedroom door. Vivian's breath hitched. The sound was gentle, almost polite, as if whatever stood on the other side had no intention of barging in uninvited. She took a step back. Then another. The knock came again. Slow, measured, not hurried, not desperate, patient. Vivian turned and fled down the hall. She did not sleep that night. Elliot had stirred when she slipped into bed beside him, but she said nothing, only curling into his warmth, listening to the silence stretch between them. By morning, the house was still. The bedroom door stood open, as though the night had swallowed its secrets whole. Vivian knew she should tell Elliot, but where would she begin? That something had spoken to her? That the presence in the house was no longer what she had thought? That Jackie's ghost, if it had ever been her at all, was not the only thing lingering here. Instead, she buried it. Days passed, then a week. Vivian moved through the house as if navigating a fragile dream, waiting for something, anything, to break the illusion of normalcy. But the house remained eerily calm, until she found the second letter. It was tucked inside a book she had never seen before, its leather binding cracked with age, its pages yellowed and brittle. The book had not been on the shelves when they moved in, she was sure of it. Vivian hesitated, the weight of the unknown pressing against her ribs. Then, carefully, she unfolded the letter. This time, the handwriting was different. Not Jackie's elegant script, but rougher, more hurried. As if whoever had written it had been desperate. It does not want her. It never did. She knew that before she left. I know it now. A drop of moisture had bloomed in the ink, smudging the words. It belongs to the house. Or the house belongs to it. I hear it in the walls. Vivian swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the paper. If you are reading this, you have already seen it. A chill bled through her veins. The final line sent her stomach plummeting. Do not let it in. A gust of cold air swept through the room, rattling the bookshelves. And then, from somewhere deep within the house, a door slammed. Vivian barely had time to breathe before she heard the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from above, coming down the stairs. The footsteps moved with a dreadful certainty, slow, deliberate, each step heavier than the last. The old wooden staircase groaned beneath their weight, the sound echoing through the silent house. Vivian remained frozen in the study, the letter still clutched in her trembling fingers. Her breath came in shallow bursts, barely audible above the rhythmic creak of unseen movement. The air had turned thick, oppressive, pressing against her skin like the walls themselves had drawn breath and now exhaled around her. She knew, without a doubt, that whatever was descending the stairs was not Elliot. Her body screamed for her to run, but fear held her still. She turned her head ever so slightly, just enough to see the doorway leading to the hall. The flickering light of the sconces barely reached beyond the study, casting long, shifting shadows. Then she saw it. A figure, no, not a figure, a darkness. A space where light should have been. It had no face, no true form, only an absence, something hollow and waiting. The air around it seemed to bend inward, drawn toward the void that pulsed at the top of the staircase. And then it took another step. Vivian stumbled back, her shoulder hitting the edge of the desk. The impact sent a few books tumbling to the floor, but she barely heard them over the rush of her own pulse. She clutched the letter tighter, as if the words scrawled across the fragile paper might somehow shield her from what was coming. The footsteps did not stop. It was descending, coming toward her. The scent of roses returned, but this time, it was sickly sweet, overripe, as if the flowers had begun to rot in stagnant water. It curled around her, slipping into her lungs, into her throat. Vivian turned and ran. She didn't think, she simply moved, her bare feet slapping against the polished floor as she tore through the hallway. The house seemed to stretch around her, the walls narrowing, the air thick with something unseen but present. Behind her, the footsteps quickened. She reached the bedroom, her trembling hands fumbling with the doorknob. It felt slick beneath her grip, as though something wet had touched it. A wave of revulsion surged through her, but she forced herself to turn the handle, shoving the door open and throwing herself inside. She slammed it shut just as something heavy struck the wood from the other side. The force rattled the hinges. Vivian staggered backward, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The room was dark, save for the silver gleam of moonlight spilling through the sheer curtains. Shadows twisted across the walls, stretching unnaturally as if something moved within them. The door shook again. And then, silence. Vivian's heart pounded in her throat. She pressed her back against the far wall, waiting, listening. The space beyond the door remained eerily still. For several moments, nothing happened. Then, a whisper. Not from the hallway, from inside the room. Her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, so slowly, she turned her head toward the mirror. And there she saw it. A figure standing just behind her reflection. Not the void from the staircase. Not the faceless thing that had followed her, but a woman. Jackie. Vivian's breath hitched. The former First Lady stood in the mirror's surface, her figure faint, like an old photograph just beginning to fade. She wore the same ivory-colored dress as before, her dark hair swept elegantly over one shoulder. But this time her face was different. Haunted, terrified. Their eyes met, and Vivian felt something cold wrap around her chest, an emotion that did not belong to her. Then Jackie's lips parted, and this time she spoke. "You have to leave." The whisper barely reached Vivian's ears, but she understood. The warning was clear. Jackie's gaze flicked toward the door, and for the first time Vivian saw something in the former First Lady's face that chilled her to the bone. Not fear, dread. The room darkened. A deep, guttural knock rattled the doorframe. Jackie's figure flickered in the mirror, her expression twisting in anguish. "It doesn't want me. It never did," she whispered, her voice raw. "It's always been waiting for someone else." Vivian felt the weight of those words settle inside her. Waiting. For her. The door burst open. A gust of frigid air slammed into the room, carrying with it the scent of earth and decay. The shadows beyond the threshold pulsed, the darkness folding inward as if something had stepped through, something that did not belong in the world of the living. Vivian turned back to the mirror, but Jackie was gone. And then the voice returned, a whisper that wrapped itself around her like a pair of unseen hands. "You let it in," Vivian screamed. Elliot found her hours later. She was sitting on the floor of the bedroom, knees pulled to her chest, staring blankly at the shattered remains of the mirror. The shards reflected 100 fractured versions of her face, each one distorted, twisted. She didn't speak when he called her name, didn't blink when he knelt beside her, his hands shaking as he tried to make sense of what had happened. The house was silent. The scent of roses had vanished. But the door, the bedroom door, which he was certain had been open when he walked in, was now closed, and from somewhere beyond it, just faint enough to be imagined, came the sound of footsteps. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.